The servant who buried his talent lost it to himself. Every gift you've been quietly sitting on, every idea you've protected from the risk of failing, every version of you that you've kept underground for safekeeping, that's the parable speaking directly into your life. And by the end of these few minutes, you'll see why that buried thing is already decaying, even now, while you tell yourself you're just waiting for the right moment. Most people read this parable and hear a story about money. A master leaves, he hands out coins to 3 servants. 2 double their share. 1 digs a hole, the master comes back, rewards the first 2, and takes everything from the 3rd. End of story. Move on, tip your offering plate. That reading is too small for what's actually happening. The Greek word translated as talent originally meant a unit of weight. Roughly 20 years of an average worker's wages, one single talent represented a life's labor. So when the master hands out 5, 2, and 1, he isn't passing out tips, he's transferring something enormous, something that could change the course of a man's existence. And the servant who buries it is making a statement about who he believes he is. Watch what the 3rd servant actually says. I knew you were a hard man, so I was afraid, so I hid it. Read that sentence again with your own life in mind, because that's the inner monologue of almost every gift you've ever refused to develop. I knew the world was harsh, I was afraid of being judged, so I hid the thing, the painting, the business. The conversation you've owed someone for 9 years, the version of yourself that wants to speak up in meetings instead of nodding along. You hid it, and now you're guarding the whole like it's an achievement. The mystics and the metaphysical traditions have always read this parable a layer deeper. They saw the talents as states of consciousness, mental capital, the raw imaginative power every person carries from the day they're born. Neville Goddard taught that your imagination is the talent, the creative faculty entrusted to every soul, regardless of circumstance. The Hermetic teaching in the Kybalion echoes it from a different angle. Mind is the substance from which experience is shaped, and what you refuse to use, the universe stops offering you. Here's what unsettles people about that reading. It removes the alibi. You'd love to claim you weren't given anything. The parable insists every servant received something. Different amounts, yes, but every single one walked out with capital in his hands. The question was never what you got. The question is what you've done with the imagination, the attention, the assumption of who you might become. The inner currency placed in your account the moment you became aware. So why does the buried talent get taken away? Because that's the law operating, not a punishment being issued. The mind is a muscle of assumption. The faculty you ignore atrophies. Walk into any rehab ward and watch what happens to a limb that's been immobilized for 6 weeks. The fibers thin, the signal between brain and tissue weakens. The body, ruthlessly efficient, reallocates resources away from what's sitting still. Your inner life works the same way. The dream you've ignored for 3 years is fading. The skill you let lapse is harder to recover than it would have been to maintain. The bold version of you that used to speak freely at 22 has slowly been replaced by someone who edits every sentence before it leaves the mouth. That's metabolism. Unused capacity gets metabolized into something else, usually anxiety, usually regret, usually the low hum of unlived potential that follows you into every quiet evening. And the parable is brutally honest about where that road ends. To everyone who has, more will be given. From the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. That sounds unfair on first reading. Read it again as physics. The mind that's actively imagining attracts more material to imagine with. The person actively practicing a craft becomes the person other practitioners want to learn from. The one assuming the feeling of being capable encounters more situations that confirm and extend that capability. Movement compounds. Stillness compounds too, just in the opposite direction. Here's where most spiritual teaching loses its honesty. It tells you to believe and receive as if the inner work were a single decision made on a Tuesday afternoon. The parable disagrees. The 2 faithful servants traded. They risked. They sat with uncertainty for months, maybe years, while the master was away. There was no guarantee the doubling would happen. Their gain came through sustained, repeated, often uncomfortable acts of investment. Acts performed without proof, without applause, without the master watching. That's what mental investment actually requires. A discipline. The discipline of holding the assumption of who you're becoming, while the current evidence still says otherwise. The discipline of imagining the conversation. the body, the work, the relationship as already accomplished, and refusing to let the mental diet drift back into the old, easier flavors of doubt. Goddard called it living in the end. It sounds poetic until you try it for a full week and realize how often your imagination defaults to the rehearsal of worst-case scenarios you've been running since adolescence. You probably know the texture of this. The morning you decided things would be different. By noon, an email, a comment, a glance, and the old assumption slipped back on like a worn coat. You were untrained. The mental muscle had been still for so long that the default pattern fired first. Here's the part the parable refuses to soften. The master doesn't return on the servant's schedule. He returns on his own, which means the accounting happens whether or not you feel ready. There's a real counter-argument worth facing. A thoughtful reader will say, this is just a story about capitalism baptized in religious language. Use it or lose it is the logic of markets, not of grace. Fair point, worth taking seriously. But the parable predates capitalism by centuries, and the same pattern shows up everywhere. Humans have studied the inner life. Hindu scripture talks about karma as the residue of repeated mental action. The Stoics observed that the faculty of attention strengthens or weakens with use. The mechanism doesn't care what tradition names it, so what does it look like to actually invest the talent? Start with the most uncomfortable inventory. What were you handed that you've quietly hidden? The voice you've never recorded? The relationship you keep meaning to repair? The version of your work that would happen if you stopped optimizing for safety? The assumption about yourself that you'd hold if you genuinely believed it was already true? Write it down. As a confession. Now ask the second question, the one with more teeth. What's the smallest possible trade you could make today with that talent? A single, observable act of investment. Because the two faithful servants didn't double their money by thinking about doubling. They went into the marketplace, they put the coins down on a table, they made an actual exchange in actual reality, which is the only place imagination becomes evidence. In the spiritual reading, the marketplace is your daily mental diet. The trade is the moment you choose, deliberately, to occupy the feeling state of the person who already has what you want, and you hold that state through the friction of a real Tuesday. The kid spilled cereal. The boss sent a passive-aggressive message. Your back hurts. And still, you stay loyal to the assumption. That's the trade. That's what doubles. The third servant's tragedy was that he was busy. Digging a hole is work. Guarding a hole is constant work. Most of the energy you spend protecting your unlived life would be enough to live it. The fear of failing with the talent costs more, over a lifetime, than any failure ever could. There's a moment in the parable that nobody quotes. When the master gives the buried talent to the servant who already had 10, the other witnesses object. It seems unjust. The master's answer is essentially, capacity is given to the one who proves they will move it. The universe, call it God, call it consciousness, call it whatever frame fits your life, entrusts more to the channel that's already flowing. Which means the real cost of burying your talent is everything that would have been added to it. The compounding that never started. The doors that don't open because the room they lead from was never entered. You felt this. The window you watched close. The opportunity that went to someone less qualified but more present. The role you would have grown into if you'd said yes when the inner nudge first arrived. That ache is the master, in some quiet way, asking for an account. Here's the part that should land hardest. The parable ends with the third servant standing in front of the master, holding the same coin he was given, saying, "See, here is what is yours." He thought returning it untouched would be enough. He thought safekeeping was the same as honoring. He missed the fact that the gift was never the coin. The gift was the invitation to participate in the doubling. The invitation to find out who he could become through the act of risking what he was already given. You've been holding the same coin for a long time. You know the one. The dream that still hums under everything you do for money. The conversation you keep drafting in your head and sending nowhere. The shift in identity that you almost made twice and then stepped back from. The talent is still there, for now. But the longer it sits in the hole, the lighter it becomes, until one day you reach in and the coin is gone, and you can't remember when it left. The honest news is that the parable is also a description of how easily it reverses. The mind that begins moving begins receiving. The first small act of investment changes the metabolism of the whole system. One genuine trade in the marketplace of your assumptions, repeated tomorrow, repeated the day after, and the doubling begins quietly underneath everything you can measure. The master is on his way back. He always is. The question isn't whether you'll be ready. The question is what you'll be holding in your hands. Stop guarding the whole. Dig up what you buried. Spend it before you forget what it was for.